Aaron, we're here, man. First episode of Half Space, and we're here in this studio, Manchester. Thank you so much for this time. So just kicking off, man. So tell us a bit about yourself.
So my name is Aaron Burns. Had a career inside football for a number of years, and now I am head of growth and athlete transition at a life insurance business, one of the biggest life insurance businesses in the UK at the moment, and also head of the Association of Former Manchester United Players, which is a charity that sits alongside the club, and our two pillars of focus are dementia and frail care for some of our senior members, and also athlete transition, because all of us have been lucky enough to be involved in first team squads for Manchester United, but doesn't necessarily mean that you can have a full and illustrious Premier League career. So that's our two focuses in the association.
Wow. So already that you've already kind of given us kind of a timeline of the things that you've been involved with. So let's take it back. Can you relate to this question of when was the first time you actually kind of like fell in love with football?
Wow. Do you know, what I'll tell you is it wasn't till I was 7 or 8, so I didn't start till I was a little bit older, should I say, in relation to just my social environment. So where I grew up initially was Moss Side, which is the suburbs of Manchester, and it wasn't that safe for young people to play out in the late 80s and the early 90s. So it wasn't until I moved to Wythenshawe, which was a little bit safer and there was more parks and fields, that I even entertained the idea of football. And it came on the school playground really when a kid that was called Aaron, and I'm obviously Aaron, just tried to make friends with me on one of my first days in school, and asked me who I supported. And at that point I didn't support a team, so I asked him who was the best, and he said Man United. So we kind of went with that. I think the important thing to mention is that I was a little bit faster, I was a little bit stronger than my counterparts who had obviously been playing for a couple years, in my opinion, at that point in time. But the sort of like gratification and the applause that I was getting led me to want to continue to play and to be investigative in terms of, well, who are Man United, what are they, what do they do, who are their main players, what's the history of the club like, and that's probably when I fell in love with football.
And you mentioned something quite interesting, actually, that you mentioned your environment, that you were surrounded by in terms of looking into moving into a new area. What was that like for you, especially at that age?
It was difficult because Moss Side's a place where there's a lot of diversity. So everyone looked and sounded like myself. But when I moved to Wythenshawe, which is like an area where there's more white people than black, especially in the early 90s, I had a lot of challenges just in terms of fitting in, which you have to sort of like compartmentalize and think about as a young person. But then after that, it was just about opportunity and proximity to opportunities as well, which I took in the first instance to just make friends. But then before I knew it, it became a love and a little bit of a passion that sort of like tied to my self story that I'd thought about prior to football.
So now that you've taken on this kind of, in a way, a new identity, being a young man going into a new area, you're now being faced with opportunities, kind of going into much more into football. How did you balance that with, having an everyday life, but now this kind of responsibility of, something might be changing for you?
It all happened pretty quick because I had to sort of like use sort of like my skill set, my communication skills, just to get my mum to buy me a pair of football boots, because we didn't have a lot of money. So I persuaded her. I said that I wouldn't have any presents at Christmas if she'd let me, if she'd get me a pair of boots, and she got me a pair of Puma Kings. I was delighted.
Okay.
Black and white Puma
Black
Kings
and
with a
white.
little fold over tongue and all that sort of stuff. Not really cool now, but they were then. And at that point, I just had to show a level of humility. I didn't really have any male role models in my life, but I was very studious and willing to take information on board. So I went to Wythenshawe Amateurs as a complete novice, and I just let the manager tell me where to play, and kind of listen to the instructions and be a sponge. And that season I scored 106 goals, and before the end of the year I was at Man United. So I barely played 1 year at grassroots. I played like 7 or 8 months, and then I was off to Man United.
Wow. So that big step of then going to Man United, you spoke about that word, role models. Who is your role model kind of like looking up, like in the game of football?
I think when I was 6 or 7, I used to look at people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Tupac and Rosa Parks, people that had made an impact on the world. So they were always my role models. They were the people that I saw making a difference. And because my mum was 16 when she had me and didn't finish school, I kind of got the impression quite early that if we were going to be successful, it had to be me. I was the only child to my mum, so it's like, if we're going to do anything, it's me. So they were my first role models. As you roll into football, you're looking at Eric Cantona, Andy Cole, Ian Wright, people of that nature. But again, it's really important that aspiration and inspiration is there, but also you can't be what you can't see. So I know subconsciously I attached to Andy Cole and Ian Wright because they looked like me and played in my position.
Yeah. And I think that kind of representation that is really important, because I think what we see here, and I think what we often get in our society, is that kind of like, football can be the vehicle, but it feels like the engine to drive you to football was something different. Could you maybe expand on that just a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. I think everyone has a self story at a young age, and as time evolves and pressure increases, I think we lose our identity of what we actually thought that we could be when we didn't understand what the remits were. And I knew that I was going to be someone that made an impact, but because of the evolution of my life and the fact that Man United came calling so quickly, I presumed that my talent was football, and that was where my superpower and my self story was going to evolve. But as football grew and I got a little bit older, I went back to my core values and realised that this game doesn't, that isn't my whole identity. It's not who I am. With or without it, I knew that I was going to be impactful, like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and those guys. So yeah, to be a footballer and to make it at the top level, you have to have a drive and a discipline and a determination and an ability to take criticism as well as praise. But it's easier to do it if you understand that you've got a self story and there's a meaning behind the titles and the elation and the trophies.
Yeah. So Aaron, we've been speaking about identity, and the core of what drives you is knowing who you are before what you do. Now, in this kind of day and age, football is it's a business, it's massive. What do you often see, especially for young people, that's going to be key markers to knowing who they are?
I think your environment plays a huge part, but you can obviously outgrow your environment. But I think it comes back to core values and belief systems. There'll be a special person in your life, whether it be your mum, your dad, your grandma, and sometimes you just have to center yourself and say, well, am I doing my grandma proud? Like all the things that they have given you and given up on in order to allow you to be successful. Like, is the action that I'm doing right now going to make her or them more or less proud of me? Because no action is neutral. You're even getting one step closer to your potential, or you're moving one step further away. So I think understanding just where you came from and the person that you wanted to be when you was younger, irrelevant of all the noise, the distractions and the finances, because I always reflect and think that I'm kind of lucky that I didn't have the career that was anticipated for me, because my growth as an individual would have been stunted till I was maybe out the game at 30 or 35. So the growth that I've had in the last 10 years has been superb, and it wouldn't have happened had I still been in the game.
Yeah. So it seems like preparation has been something that's been kind of like a moving vehicle for you throughout your whole life. If we was to kind of like pivot now into kind of like the lane of football, and we're talking about preparation, can you remember from your memories, as a young age, you are now preparing into this kind of going into football? What was that like for you in terms of that preparation, and what do you remember?
I remember a lot of good coaches, when you walk into the cliff for the first time, it says Manchester United on the front of the building, and it's like, who's been here? And he was like, no, they won the European Cup in 1968 here. You know, Bobby Charlton's been here, Dennis Law's been here, Eric Cantona's been here, David Beckham's been here. And the main thing that I understood was that I never knew how any of those grew up. You know, I didn't know what car their mum and dad drove. I just knew that they were really good at football. So that gave me a belief system that I could create or curate anything I wanted to be, irrelevant of my circumstances and environment. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is we had a coach called Paul McGuinness. I'm still in contact with him, and he used to say, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And he also used to say that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So I never wanted to be the weakest link. I wanted to make sure that I was prepared, and preparation came from me, one, through a desire to learn and take this information on because I was studious, but two, partially because of embarrassment. I talked about my grandma before. She used to have like this rundown like white van. My mum didn't drive, so the only way I could get to football was through my grandma. And everyone in the team knew that my gran had a van, and they all had nice cars and was from two-parent households and stuff. But in my head, I was telling myself a story that like they didn't know, and if I got to training early, they wouldn't see me getting in and out the van and stuff like that. And I used to want my mum to come to football, but not at the same time, because if she didn't, I could get in the front, and if not, I had to sit in the back. So that embarrassment of my sort of like environment and my circumstances, and the wishfulness that I was maybe had the benefits and the perks that other people had, became my superpower. Because if training started at 6, I'd tell my grandma we need to be there at 5, so no one would see me. But what that gave me was an extra hour of practicing, which I later in life understood that that's purposeful practice. I'm practicing on the things that I'm weak at, my right foot or my head in. So in 8 or 9 years, from sort of like the age of 8 till 18, I'd committed to like 1,344 additional hours of training, just because I was embarrassed of my grand's car that she drove. But that gave me the stepping stone to be successful, and that's where consistency plays its part now.
Yeah. And in hindsight, what's the one thing that football didn't prepare you for?
Football didn't prepare me for my love to break my heart. So football was my first love. It's almost my first heartbreak as well. So it didn't prepare me for that. They indoctrinate you into an environment where you're at Man United, you're going to be a footballer, but they don't allow you to understand how to deal with the heartbreak and the rejection. And the ideology is that, you know, if you make it, you've obviously done well, you're the 1%, but that means that 99% of us aren't going to make it. But I can't allow myself to sit in that mindset, because that's not elitism. So I have to stay in this area or this space where I believe I'm going to be the 1%, which means that it opens you up for a massive wound when you are the 99%. And actually, I don't know how you get around that, because that's what it takes. It needs delusion, it needs dedication, it needs single-mindedness, but it leaves you open to being heartbroken.
You said football was your first love, but also your first heartbreak. I wonder if you can tap into more in that when it comes to the context of, do you remember who was in the room when that happened?
Yeah, vividly. I was, you know that your contract's coming to an end, and you're waiting for the sort of like negotiations. The gaffer, Sir Alex Ferguson, calls you in, and we had a good conversation, and I was top scorer in the reserves this season. So he just basically said that, you know, you're the top scorer in the reserves. We think you've done magnificent. You've been with the club since you were 8 or 9, but the pathway is blocked. And what he meant by that was Fraser Campbell was at the club, Giuseppe Rossi, Sylvain Ebanks-Blake, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Luis Saha, Cristiano Ronaldo, Wayne Rooney, Carlos Tevez, Nani, a number of good attacking options. So I understood that the conversation was coming, but you just hold on to the belief system that it might not. I think from probably 17, when you're in the building full time and you know who else is in the building and what the opportunities look like, I think that's when you kind of come to the realization. I think as a group of young players, we all knew that if he was going to get some opportunities, it was at the start of the season, because the manager had a way of understanding when the business side of the season came, and it was after Christmas, it was like, no, we're putting our foot down, and he couldn't afford the mistakes or the slip-ups that a young player may potentially give you. So you kind of know. But I think at that point, you still believe that you're going to navigate the football pyramid and have a successful career. It just might not be with the best club in the world.
Yeah, and you've navigated football, but also as well your own kind of like personal dreams outside of football in such I think, in a fantastic way. What does that look like now, kind of in this day and age for you?
I think the main thing is I've got a goal that I want to impact 100,000 lives, and I know that that isn't something that you can do individually. Previously, if it had been attached to football, I would have believed that scoring the winner in the FA Cup final against Man City in the derby was probably the way to impact 100,000 lives quite quickly. So I didn't want it to be about virality or a moment like that. It needed to be impactful. It needed to be a lesson that someone could take forward with them, and potentially a message that somebody could pass on. Because Manchester United is a feeling, it's a tradition, it's a legacy, and they're the belief systems that are ingrained in myself. So I want the things that I've learned from the club and from my circumstance and scenario to be passed on to others, to potentially help them navigate the academy system or the life as a footballer, but understanding that you are not your title, you're much bigger than the game, and if you stay as a figment of the game, you will realise it doesn't matter if it's 21 or 35, that the game will forget about you. Because when I was growing up, R9 and Zinedine Zidane and Romario and all those guys were the best thing ever. Yeah. They were up there with Pele and Maradona. However, sometimes they're not even put in the conversation anymore, and that's just because of a generational thing. And if I sat down with my dad or my uncle, he'd tell me about how good John Barnes is, but I might say that I prefer Mo Salah. So it has to be more than the game. It has to be beyond the white lines, and it has to be impactful beyond a generation or two, to give people, the ability to build a blueprint of success and showcase what success looks like on and off the pitch.
And speaking about kind of like impact, tell us a bit more about this.
So the consistency blueprint is probably 10 or 15 years worth of work. I think the main component of it is, when I was 9 or 10, my aim was to get into Manchester United's first team, and understood that that was a 10-year plan, and I was willing to work every single day to get there. I think that people today need to look at that and understand, well, what do I want to be in 10 years? What's my North Star? But ultimately then reverse engineer their actions back to today and day one. What can I do to get one step closer to my long-term goals, and understand that you can probably achieve a lot more than you think in 10 years, and your expectations of what you can achieve in one are probably reduced a little bit. So I need them to understand that everything's possible, that you can be whatever you want, and ultimately by consistency and showing up on a regular basis with a goal and an understanding of where you want to be, that you can achieve your goals. And at the moment, trajectory is always more important than positioning. Everyone's looking at, well, how many followers have they got? What's their job title? Trajectory is more important, because if last year you were number 2, and now you're number 3, but I was number 45 and now I'm number 31, my trajectory is better than that individual, even though I'm not at the status level that they're at currently.
And trajectory, what advice would you give to any young person, any parent, or anyone on this road of identity? What words of encouragement would you give to them?
Consistency always wins. The man with a plan always wins. But the ability to stay in the game, to have skin in the game and to stay in the game, because sometimes to win you just have to outlast your competition.
We're speaking about kind of like social media and the impact that you're seeing that it's having on a generation. What's your insight into that, especially from the lens of kind of football players and young people?
I think from the lens of young people, you've got great access to everybody. I think you should be using that for positivity. So what that means is I think you've got the opportunity to study success in your arena, which our generation didn't necessarily have unless you were in proximity, which I was lucky enough to be. I think you've got the opportunity to look further afield in different sports, and success in business or in other sports is transferable and can help you. But we have to stay away from sort of like the materialistic things, like what car is this person driving or how much is he on a week. It's about what were the fundamentals that got him to that position where the contracts and the houses and the lavish stuff takes care of itself. I think social media can be a huge vehicle, because in the world you have to. I talked earlier about positives and negatives. You get one step closer or you're getting one step further away. Social media is exactly the same. You can distract yourself with things, or you can attract everything that you want into your life. And social media should be used for attraction rather than distraction, because ultimately you're dumbing yourself down to your capabilities and watching other people rather than doing yourself. And the work rate sometimes goes unseen. So I think the elder statesmen in the game and the people that are at the top of the industry, we've got a responsibility, or they've got a responsibility to showcase the actual work a little bit more. I've seen an interview recently with Frank Lampard on Project Football, and he was talking about how his dad ingrained work rate into him. I think he got an £11 million move to Chelsea. And after training, even though he was there in Chelsea with the superstars, he was getting his spikes on after training and practicing his sprints, because he knew that was an area of the game that was going to help him. And to have that mentality after being an £11 million transfer, which at the time was a lot of money, shows what it really takes. And I think more people need to showcase that. And Ronaldo's very good at it, but some of the other guys, Neymar, Messi, those kind of individuals, I think we need to see a little bit more of what it actually takes to be where they are, because it's not just talent. The majority of it is hard work, determination and discipline, and the willingness to miss out on all the gratification in order to seek that gratification later down the line.
And I think when I look around this room, we see all of these football shirts, but beyond their badge, we see their names. And, it's something personal. When we talk about kind of now, the topic of social media, you see the importance of like personal brand and how that's becoming much more of kind of something that's being embedded in our culture. Could you speak a bit more about the importance of like personal branding and how it can also impact football in a positive way?
Yeah, personal branding is so important. I think the sport is becoming more diverse. When you go and watch academy football, there's a lot more diverse young players playing the game, which means that the sport itself has to understand what diversity actually is and the environments, because we build an ecosystem and an echo chamber that this is what a footballer does. But a footballer from a different background may not respond to the criticism or the routine or the restrictions in the same way as another. And it could be down to parental guidance, it could be down to the ecosystem that they're in and around, the schooling environment. All of those factors matter. And I think we're losing a lot of good players because of a lack of understanding of where they come from and the things that drive them within their community, their culture and their religion. So football's got a massive responsibility to understand that the game is the game and it always will be, and it's evolving, but so is the culture, and the club or the industry that gets hold of that the quickest will have the most success.
And talking about success, what does that look like for you in the future? But also just kind of like a fun, playing question. Where would you like to see yourself in the context of football? What's always been your dream role?
I'm fascinated with the sporting directorship at Manchester United. I think that's the best job in sport. I think that's the best job in sport. So that's the one that I'm fascinated by, because that mixes business and football as a combination. And they're kind of the prisms and the realities and the remits that I know. So I think that's the best job in football. I think success is dependent on the personality, and I think we have to understand sometimes to reflect and evaluate on our success, we have to sometimes understand how far we've come. Because I may have overcome 5 or 6 hurdles where someone else has only overcome 1. So what they perceive to be success is not my success. So I think we have to understand what our core values were and the reason why we began, in order to understand what success actually looks like.
And like, speaking of like success, and as we were about to land, what's the one thing that you could say, you know, finally, that football kind of like doesn't teach? And what's the one thing you feel like positively you want to make impact as to why you can change that?
Football doesn't teach us how to transition, how to build a life beyond football, whether you have to do that at 18 or 38. The transition is everyone has to transition. It doesn't matter if you're Cristiano Ronaldo or somebody else. Everyone has to transition. I think as the world of sport, we need to get better at that. We need to understand that the job title, the badge, doesn't represent who we are, but we have got a skill set, a level of skills that will allow us to be successful in other arenas if we can understand the transitional skills and relate them to the roles of the new game that you're about to play. So understand the sector, understand the people that have been successful there, and understand what brought you success in sport. And if we can implement that within a new sector, I guarantee that you will outwork the majority of the competition because of the things that you have to overcome just to be a professional footballer. But we have to show a level of humility. We have to be willing to start at ground zero like we did when we was training as footballers, and understand that this is a 5, a 10 or a 15-year plan, and the fact that you scored X amount of goals in whatever league you scored doesn't matter when you sat at a boardroom with the CEO of a certain organisation. It matters what you can produce now in this new arena.
Aaron, it's been a huge pleasure, man. Just even kind of reflecting back when we first met at the Footballers Blacklist event and connecting on LinkedIn. You know, LinkedIn's a powerful tool of just, you know, hearing a conversation, a post that you were kind of, you know, talking about so powerfully about a particular subject. And now, like, we've linked in, you know, Footballers Blacklist, and now we're here, you know, shooting the first Half Space podcast. If for people who are listening to this, how can they kind of connect with you, reach out to you?
Instagram's probably the best way. A8Burns87 on Instagram. LinkedIn, Aaron Burns. Website, aaronburns.co.uk. And obviously we've got the United by Association podcast on The Long Game on YouTube. So available for conversations. I appreciate you first and foremost, because you stopped me at the Football Blacklist and mentioned that you'd seen it on LinkedIn, and that's how we forged a conversation which has led to here. I'm grateful that I'm the first person on the podcast. I'll come back episode 50 and we'll go again. But yeah, no, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for taking in the content, and thank you for the bravery to start the conversation, because this conversation could lead us anywhere, but it came from you reaching out and starting it. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you, brother.